Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are on page 1331. 1331. Okay. So the context. Explaining in general the third type of sweetening of the Gevurahs. Hamtakas Gevurahs, but now from within, from the bottom up. Not chesed, the sweet waters of kindness and love, sweetening the severities and judgments and concealments and darkness of Gevurah, but rather it's being sweetened from within, meaning from its root. And why is that from the bottom up? Because that root is concealed. It's a koyach nelam. It's fundamentally concealed. As we learned up on page, all the way, the page is essentially the third type from page 1325 to 1329. On 1329, he said, Ubir Inyan. To explain this, let's talk about Avir and Oir. Two states, one called environment or air, and one is light. Avir fundamentally is a state of darkness. And he explained, after bringing all the different sources, that it's the level of the Rishimu, that trace, that impression that contains in a capsule, in a capsule form, concentrated form, in a nakuda, in a yud, everything from before the tzimtzum. And he's explained on page 1330, there are two aspects to it. Like in the Avir, there's the Avir Hanitfis, that somewhat is graspable, and that's the Oir Yud, that Avir is Oir Yud. That's the Oir within it. And then there's the Rishimu itself, which is the Avir She'ena Nitfis. That's completely concealed, as he explained. The Etzem Nekudas Rishimu, the letters of the Rishim, the letters that are the Koyach HaGvul, the power of the finite, that originates from the Helam HaAtzmi, the core concealment. And then there's the Oir that's concealed within it, the Oir Ein Sof, on all the levels, he explained. All concealed. The air that is revealed the air that God allocates for another, the air to himself, and even Etzema air, the core energy that is not revealed at all, even to himself, but it's still air. And those are the two things, the Helam Atzmi and Avir, which is air kolaboy, that's the Yud Sheba Avir. That's the last line he said at the bottom of page 1330. There's the end of the paragraph there. So then came the next paragraph, what we're learning now. What is this Yud? The Yud of Avir, which is included in the Rishimu. It clearly connects with Ur, because it's Avir's Ur Yud. But he's explaining what the Yud is. To understand that, he went back, what is a Yud in general? So a Yud symbolizes Chochma. The Yud in Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, we know it's Chochma. Now, one aspect of it is that it's the tzimtzum of Chochma. Why is it a Yud? Because the Yud is a concentrated point that conceals, like any mashpia, when he wants to teach to a student, it says always, Leilam Yishna Adam L'Tamidi B'derech Ksara. If the teacher in a concentrated form, that's the Yud. It's a form of tzimtzum. And therefore, Chochma, which is the beginning of revelation, coming from the superconscious states, the Yud indicates tzimtzum, miyut, diminishment. However, Mikol Mokim, he says, and I'm now summing up on page 1331, Ikra mitis inyaru, the primary function of the Yud, the primary role of the Yud, is the other extreme. Not tzimtzum, but actually bittul. That because it's so close to the source, because it's so close to the source, it doesn't have any substance of its own. So it's a very different aspect. It's not a contradiction. Both are alluded to and both are hinted to in the Yud. And that's the Krevel Ein Sof. That's why it's Ktana. Bittul Betachlis, like he said, the stars. And that is the premise of Chochma. The same thing with Klei HaChochma. It's utter bittul. And they said the Ur of Chochma is Ayin of Yesh Amiti. Ayin, which is again bittul like a Yud. We discussed that. from Tanya Perek Lamed Hey, that in Chochma you sense the Echad Emes, like he said from Tanya Perek Lamed Hey, Echad Emes Shehu Levadei V'hu Ve'ein Zulase. That's the level of Chochma. It senses God alone and nothing else, like I explained, because Chochma is the beginning of intelligence, but true intelligence is about recognizing a higher truth. In this case, the truth of the divine. There's nothing but God. And then he said the difference between Eira Chochma and Klei Chochma is the Eira Chochma is the actual ayin, Hu Levad Ve'ein Zulase, the actual experience, and the Klei Chochma, as I explained it, is that it's musig. It's beginning to have some comprehension in it. Obviously, in Bina, it will come fully developed, but Bina on its own is a yesh, not an ayin. So Chochma can teach this to Bina. But the beginning is the Klei Chochma is that shemusig b'chinas bitl hazeh. And it's a state of kilah. In the parentheses, he added that Keser is even higher than that. There's completely no entity at all. Here, there's at least a yud. There's some substance here. Like he says, it has a tzir. In Keser, there's no tzir at all. There's no shape at all. It's utter ephes. So the bitl is even higher. Which, okay. Then the next section we learned was that the Ramaz, that the yud of the Havaya is Abba ve'Ima Elohim, is Chochma and Bina. That is Chochma and Bina, the higher Chochma and Bina, with Etzem Yud being Abba, Chochma, and the Mili of the Yud, meaning how it's spelled out, the Gilui of the Yud Vav Daled, is Bina. So what do we derive from that? That Etzem Yud is Atzmi Chochma. Okay. Then he combines that with the next piece. And the next piece is that we also know that the Kav, remember the Kav is the other track. Rishimu is concealment. The power Koyach HaGvul, the root of the containers. The Kav is the root of Oyer. And it originates from Eir Ein Sof, the Gilui before the Tzimtzum. So he said that the Reishis HaKav, the beginning of the Kav is also like a Yud. And that's higher than the Kav as it begins to create and manifest in the world of Ak. Because Ak is already the Hey Rishena, the Hey. It's already a vision, it's a snapshot, and like a blueprint of all of existence. But the Reishis HaKav, which the Eitz Chaim compares to it's like a level of Atik, like in Keser, there's Atik, the highest level. So higher than Ak, he says, Dugmas B'chinas Atik Datzilis is higher than the Golgalta of Ak, higher than the skull of Ak, and that's the Nekuda of Yud, the Reishis Gilui HaKav. Now, when you combine that to what we learned earlier, that Chochma Stima is fundamentally the level of Atik. What we learned was that Primis Abba, Primis Atik. So he said that Atik, like he says, Chochma Stima B'chinas Atik Be'etzem Husa. Why? Because Chochma ultimately is not about intelligence. It's about experiencing, like we said, that God is the higher reality of the divine. And he explained back then that is the deep pleasure that we have in intelligence is not just because we understand, but because it's connecting to Atik, which is the deep pleasure of recognizing the truth of the divine. So based on that, Imken Yeshlema, the Chochma Shebechinas Yud, Yeshlema the B'Shosha Zel B'chinas Reishis Gilui HaKav. So now he's combining everything we said here. So based on that, the Chochma, which is the Yud that we learned earlier, and now we learned that the head of the top of the Kav is like Atik, and combining that with the Chochma Stima is Atik. So the root of Chochma, the Yud of Chochma, is rooted in the Yud of the top, of the beginning of the Kav, which is like Atik. That's the Kabbalistic technical language. What it means in simple English, and he still has not brought it back to Avir, Yud, which we're going to learn now, we'll continue learning. But in simple English, what it means is the following. That Chochma is an interface between the divine and existence. So it's like a Yud. On one hand, like a Tzimtzum, so it conceals. So the next levels could receive, like the student can receive. But on the other hand, Yud also indicates that it's connected to the very essence. And that's why it's completely bottled. It's nullified because it senses a higher truth. So it's like a state of awe where you lose your whole identity as you're absorbed by a higher truth. And that's primarily in Atzmis of Chochma. And he's connecting that also exists in the beginning of the Kav, also has that element, and it's actually the root of it. So essentially, Chochma leads us to Chochma Stima, which leads us to Atik, which leads us to the Atik of over Ak, or Adam Kadman, which is the beginning of the Kav. So right now we have the connection between Chochma, the Nekuda of Chochma Gluya, the revealed Chochma in Atzilus, which is like a Yud, to the Yud of the Kav. We've not yet discussed its connection to the Rishimu and Avir, Yud. But that's so far what we've established here. And that's where we're up to. I'm happy to take any questions, but remember, the topic is not over yet. But maybe based on what I've just said, if anybody wants clarification about any of the points I just made right now. So I'm happy to answer that. And then we'll continue reading. No questions? So on page 1331, the line that begins Chulu, V'in Kein Yesh Leimer, which I just summed up. I'll continue reading from the last word on the line, V'habachai. He's now going to bring another source, Rabbeinu Bachai and Chumash. He's going to bring that into the picture as he builds the case of what this Yud exactly is, the Yud of Avir, Yud. So far, Chochma and the Reshis Kav. Yeah, okay. And these pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So here we go. V'abachai Resh Parsha V'Eira. The Bachai in the beginning of Parsha V'Eira. Remember, Parsha V'Eira is where Shem Havaya is first introduced as a verse. I mean, Havaya is used earlier, but that's where Hashem says to Moshe that I appeared to the Ovis, to Avram Yitzchak Yankov, I appeared with Kel Shaddai, with the name Kel Shaddai. V'Shmi Havaya lo nadaiti lem. I did not reveal to them, I did not make them aware of my name Havaya. And to you I will reveal Yudke Vovke. It's one of the verses in the Torah that clearly is a mystical verse and a Kabbalistic one. I'll reveal to you the name of Havaya. So what does the Rabbeinu Bachai say there? He says, speaking about Chochma, he writes the following. That God, kanoni, he allowed us to acquire, like from the word kinyan, he imparted to us reishis darkei, the beginning of his path. And what does he say? V'inyan reishis darkei hainu reishis hamshachas hakav. So reishis darkei, what does that mean? The beginning of his path. I mean, there's the concept reishis chochma yiras Hashem, but there's an expression reishis darkei. There's a posuk reishis darkei. So literally, it means he revealed to us his intentions, his plan. Like when you go out on a journey, and someone says when you embark on a journey, at the outset of the journey, someone tells you, "Why are we going on this journey?" That would be the literal meaning here. That Hashem imparted to us Reishis Darkei. But Al Pi Kabbalah and Rabbeinu Bachai brings this. Reishis Darkei is the level of Reishis Hamshachas HaKav. The Kav is Darkei. The Kav, remember, is like a line, like a thread, like a laser beam or paintbrush of the divine that will create existence. And what's Reishis Darkei? The beginning of this journey, this derech, this path. What is the beginning? Is Reishis HaKav, what he called before the Yud. That's like Atik. Valkain, B'china zu de Chochma, and therefore this level of Chochma, and the Rabbeinu Bachai connects it to Chochma, because he's writing it about B'inyan HaChochma. I didn't look inside, but clearly what he says here, he's discussing it regarding Chochma. So I think he brings there Reishis Chochma Yiras Hashem, maybe. I don't remember for sure. So he says Valkain, and therefore, and what do we derive from this? And what do we learn from this? Valkain, and therefore, B'china zu de Chochma. This level of Chochma, Hagam, Shi B'chinas Eir, even though Chochma is a level of Eir, because it's Gilui. because it is ultimately a revelation. It's like a nakuda, like a yud, but it's gili. It's not concealed. The zel kol inyan chochma. The parentheses, a few lines. He just elaborates a bit more about why chochma is oir, because this is the whole purpose of the whole function and the whole functionality of chochma. Shebchinas oir v'gili. It's a form of revelation and a form of light and revelation. The keser ubchinas helam. Keser is a state of concealment. It's superconscious. But chochma is already the beginning of consciousness. It's the first of the 10 revealed spheres. Keser is state of helam. But chochma ubchinas gili. And chochma, relatively speaking, is gili. Hagam shenikra gam kein stimin. Even though chochma is sometimes also referred to, it's also called stimin, which means closed up. When you say sasim stimin, those levels that are sealed or closed. It doesn't bring this. Anistaris Lashem Elokeinu, we say, is often we talk about chochma and bin is nistaris, van niglis, vavke is the lower levels. So we see that chochma sometimes is referred to as concealed or sealed or covered up. Nevertheless, it's all relative. It's the state of oyer, not the state of helam. Compared to lower levels, chochma is considered helam. But the real helam is keser. And chochma is relatively a state of gili, even though it has that element of concealment. Look, he said before the yud is also tzimtzum. So there is concealment in chochma. However, it also has er and gili. It's not complete, utter concealment. It's not fundamental. Chochma is stima and higher levels. That's in keser. That's considered completely concealed, or completely, or completely beyond revelation. But chochma also has an element of gili in it. Shalzen nemar yehi oyer, and that's where it says. Remember the pasuk after v'cheshach al pnei tehem. So he said, by he oyer. What's he oyer? That let there be a light. That is the level of chochma. Ukamoy v'teira oyer. Teira oyer. Teira is chochma, and teira is compared to oyer, the light of teira. Ukiyadua. And as it's known, this is all making a case that chochma is connected to oyer and gili. But he's going to obviously say about another side. So he says, okay, hagam shu b'chinas oyer. Remember, there's a hagam. But let's continue. Ukiyadua, as it's known, the gam b'chinas pnimis ha-chochma. Also, the inner dimension of chochma that we referred to earlier, pnimis ha-chochma, remember we said that pnimis ha-chochma is, he used actual words, the yud, okay, the kreva later and stuff, so he says, pchinas ma de chochma, because chochma is koyach and ma. Chochma is the letters koyach ma, the bittel, the ma, the ayin, the yud of chochma, ma de chochma, shel pchinas ayin de keser mamish. Remember, chochma ma ayin to motza, chochma is carrying the ayin of keser mamish. Harizeh b'chinas ayin de keser k'moishu bein hanetzolim. It's still not keser itself. It's the ayin of keser, the bittel of keser, how it is bein hanetzolim, how it's found among the emanations. So it's carrying that high level of bittel, pnimis ha-chochma. So he's saying that even pnimis ha-chochma, which is higher than Gilui because it's carrying the ayin of keser, but it's carrying that bittel into the world of Gilui, into the world of the netzolim, of the emanations of the spheres, the 10 spheres. So that's what he establishes here, that chochma, even the highest level, still is bringing it, ultimately is the beginning of bringing it into the world of Gilui. This is one side of chochma. Makol mokim, that's the parentheses. Now he's going to the other side. Makol mokim, so even though hagam shei b'chinas oyer, chochma is light, as we just explained, makol mokim, nevertheless, harizeh b'chinas havdalah. That's the word he says here. Nevertheless, it's removed. He doesn't use the word concealment. He says it's removed. So it's Gilui, but it's still of a higher nature. So essentially, Chochma is literally an interface. On one hand, it's already coming into the world of spheres, and it will impart these levels into Bina and the lower levels. But on its own, it's still in a removed level. So it's removed, even while it's Gilui. Because this is how it is in general, Chochma. Wisdom in general, in general, it's in the state of removed. And he's going to explain why. For sure, because like we just said, there, the key focus on Chochma there is not the spark of an idea that will be explained in Bina. It's a recognition of a higher reality, the bittul of godliness. Like I said, when a person is intelligence itself, you can focus on two sides. A person could say, I'm an intelligent person, I understand this, and it's about me understanding. So there's a certain element of yes, you, or the idea is understood. I'm absorbed in a higher truth, in a higher reality. That's when Chochma is looking up to Keser, and it's identifying with Hu Levad Even Zulose. It's all about recognizing a higher truth. There's the other side where Chochma is about intelligence itself. It's the spark of an idea that's developed in Bina. In simple terms, you see people who are very good minds, but they're very arrogant. It's about them. I'm a smart person. And they can also even distort some of their intelligence due to their own biases and prejudices. Whereas the true nature of Chochma is bittul. It's supposed to elicit complete selflessness. That I am nothing. I am just a channel of a higher truth shining through me. And you see this all the time. You can see it in scientists and intelligent people, some who understand that all they are is a channel for a higher truth. Like I've pointed out many times, Talmud Chacham, the ultimate compliment you give someone is a student of Chacham, Talmud Chacham. To call somebody a Chacham is one thing, but Talmud Chacham meaning he's always a Talmud of Chachma. He's always a Talmud of something greater than he is. He's always in a state of being a student, even though he's a tremendous scholar and a teacher of many. But he always remains a recipient, basically. And then you could have someone who's filled with themselves. Doesn't have to be arrogant, but they're not necessarily just a transparent channel of a higher truth. Chassidus, of course, explains very clearly that the true role of intelligence, why God gave us intelligence, was in order for us to be able to transcend our subjective interests and suspend that in the face of something greater than ourselves, and then elevate our midas to that point, like we learned earlier with mudva, murgish, and muskel. I mean, this alone is a revolutionary concept. That intelligence was not meant just to give us power to be able to develop technology and be able to live better lives and conquer the world. It was given to us to be able to experience the divine that transcends the mortal, subjective human being. So it's really a bridge. And that's why Chochma plays such a key role, because Chochma is Hu Levad Even Zulose. Pnimis HaChochma captures the ayin, the bittul, the ma. Chetzenis HaChochma starts bringing it into the kelim, and the keli, the musag, and that will ultimately integrate it into our existence. So there's both sides to Chochma. The Gilui, but on the other hand, there's now the Havdalah. Sharigam b'chinas chetzenis HaChochma, Anikun Nekudas HaSkola, because even the outer dimension of Chochma, let alone the Pnimis of Chochma, which is called the Nekudas HaSkola, the point, the spark, the kernel, the seed of an idea, is really higher. It's still higher, transcends full comprehension. So when the spark of the idea, on one hand, yes, it came into consciousness, but without Bina, you can't call it Asaga Mamish. You can't say I fully understand it. You could say I sense a higher truth. I sense the truth of it. And you have the spark of it. But it's higher than Asaga Mamish. Oh, wow. Okay, so now I see, I just want to say this before I continue reading. Chochma plays a tremendous role in Ayin Beis. Not so much recently. Actually, yes. Yichud Abba v'im Elohim, where Chochma being a gaze at Arich and Atik, at the Metzach, the forehead. But Chochma itself was dissected very much in detail by the Rebbe Rashab, both in volume 1, but especially in volume 1, a lot in volume 1 and volume 2, both. Especially the second half of volume 1, closer to the end, there's a lot of talk about, well, not just close to the end, in general there, where he talks about Chochma, what is intelligence? And that's where he brings that Chochma. Actually, I said the second half. It's also the first half of Ayin Beis, now I remember. He speaks about Chochma as opposed to Bina. That Chochma is more than intelligence. It's Hanochas Sichlis. It's the resonance of intelligence. He called it Riyah. Even higher is the envisioning of an idea, visualizing an idea. In other words, it's much more about sensing the truth of something than pure comprehension. It's not just the dissecting of the details. The Nekudas HaChochma carries the truth of the idea. Whereas Bina is like the expansive river, where there it comes into the details, and you can get lost in those details. That's why you need the spark of Chochma to always be keeping Bina honest and on track. So that's what he's continued to. So I see he's bringing that into the picture. So though it's very brief here, just a few lines, it's actually pages upon pages in volume 1 in Ayin Beis. So the more you understand what it says there, the better. But I'm just trying to sum it up here. So he says like this: the Gamn is barely ill, and it was also explained earlier. The inyan hasichli the b'chinas Chochma. So now he's saying even the seichel of Chochma, even when you're getting into the intelligent component, till now, primis Chochma is the bitl of Chochma, the recognition of hu levadei, the ayin of Kesser, the bitl, the ma. He said now, chitzenis Chochma is higher than asog and mamish. But he's saying we also learn that even the seichel of Chochma, the very intelligence that lies within the spark of an idea, because remember, an idea is ultimately has intelligence in it. Hu b'chinas hanochas sichlis. It's really about the hanochas. Hanocha means the leg, ugulate, the resonance, or how it settles in. The hanocha, the sense of what the idea is about. Shezeh ein bo b'hasaga. And that type of intuition, if you wish, even though I don't want to really use that word, but that sense, hanocha sichlis, that resonating element, is not something that comes into comprehension. That's why someone can come up with an idea and they know there's a certain truth to that idea. You can't necessarily convey that truth to someone. You can't really explain it. You could just say, I've like let's say you're struggling with a problem, with a dilemma. And then you have a flash of an idea, a solution. I'm sure it's happened to everybody. And there's a certain even deep pleasure. You don't have it fleshed out, but you have the spark of an idea. And you say, I just got it. I remember many times this has happened. That I just got it is it can't explain to someone. Someone else sitting there say, what did you get? So you can start explaining it afterwards. But the that sense, that resonating anochas sichlis that he's referring to here is not asoga. It's not a comprehensible thing. It's something beyond pure understanding. Once you explain it, you can explain and say, and people can understand, okay, this is the solution. But not that flash that Chochma carries, that initial flash of that element. Because, for example, you can start developing the answer, the solution, and then the development dilutes it, and it doesn't really solve the problem. So you have to go back to that moment where you had that flash and try to figure out what's the best way to flesh that out into details. So that's what he says. That's what we learned earlier at length. He doesn't elaborate here. He just says in this Bar Le'il, but I gave a little more explanation, but there's a lot more to it as well. So if you need more explanation, I'll be happy to give it, but let's suffice now for that. This is all Chetzenis Achach, which is the mile of Masaga. And like we learned that it's the resonance, which is higher than Asaga. And for sure, Pnimis Achach, Harihu B'chinas Nivdal, is for sure removed, in a state of being removed, meaning removed from Bina and the spheres. So on one hand, it's a Gilui that has entered the zone of consciousness and Gilui, revelation Oyer, but it remains Nivdal and removed. This is Shlomo Melech says that even though he speaks with wisdom, but it remains elusive, distant from him. So there's a level. They say that it says that on Para Aduma or other things, there remains Rechekim Mimenu. So you see that the word Chochma here is being used. So you could have a Chochma that remains elusive and removed. Like he writes on the Kutta Teira, Dibra Masel B'yem Hashminis Hatzeres Knishin. So on the Kutta Teira, there's a Maimer that the 8th day Knishin they entered. So there he talks about this discussion. The Rebbe Rashab is continuing to build a case here of what Chochma is exactly. This Chochma which relates to the Reishis Hakav. So he says was also explained earlier, the Chochma b'chinas moker harochik li'ishtalshlus. Bina is a moker hakorev. Bina is a source, a close source, like a source that relates to ishtalshlus. And Chochma, though it's a source, but it's a moker harochik. It's a source from a distance, like the word recheka, from a distance. The kolshkein b'chinas primis ha-Chochma. And for sure, the inner dimension of Chochma, she b'chinas richuk, is in a state of distance, being that it's a transmission coming from Atik, like we said before, Ayin of Kesed all the way to Atik, like we said before about Chochma touching Chochma Stima, connecting to Atik, Be'etzem Husa. Like he writes in the Kutta Teira, in the beer, the explanation of Zeis Chukas HaTeira. You just see, as I pointed out a number of times, when the Rebbe Rashab starts loading and all these sources, that he really wants to establish a very solid ground, a very grounded sources for the ideas we're discussing here. So he's quoted quite a few sources in the last few pages, but here's a few more. But what does this all lead to? That's what I'm trying to get to. Im Kain, move on. So based on this, so Im Kain, if this is the case, is move on, it's understood, the B'chinas Primis HaChochma, that the inner dimension of Chochma, Ubefrat Kamoishi B'Sharshu B'chinas Reishis HaKav, and specifically, how it is in its root, like we said before the Yesh Lemer, that it's rooted in the Reishis, in the top, in the head of the Kav, which is the Yud, Harizeh Muvdel Legamri Memohus HaCheshach. It's completely removed from the Muhus HaCheshach. I don't really understand what that means. I'll be very honest. I have to read on. It's completely removed from the personality of darkness. Well, before he said that is the beginning of Eir and Gilui, but it's still in a state of Havdalah. Now he's saying it's also removed from the state of darkness. Let's see where he goes with this. But I want to stop before I continue, before the Im Kain, if anybody wants to ask anything, because I did read quite a few lines.
I do. We always say that in regards to Kesed, that Arik is the one pointing down and Atik is the one, so to speak, pointing up. Now he's saying the beginning of the whole thing is really an Atik, or is it, can you explain that?
Where do you see Arich? He didn't mention Arich altogether.
No, page 2 ago was even, or maybe you mentioned it. Sometimes I don't remember whether you mentioned that Arich is pointing down and Atik is sort of pointing up.
Is he referring to that here? Where do you see?
No, but he said, you just said it comes from Atik, a source. So
but we also learned Primius Abba, Primius Atik. The Primus of Chochma connects with Atik as well.
That I understand, but I want to understand, how do you put those two things together? I can't.
Which two things? That Kesser has two parts to it.
Right.
There's a part that's Atik removed and higher, and there's the Tachtena, the bottom part of the Maitzel, Tachtena Sheba Maitzel from the emanator. Arich is the lower part, that is the Reish, the beginning of the emanations. But he's not discussing that here. Here he's discussing Chochma. Chochma is the beginning of the 10 spheres. Chochma gets its energy from Kesser, and ultimately from Arich, but also from Atik. What he's focusing on is how Chochma relates to Atik.
In other words, gets its energy is not the same as its beginning. I got you. I think I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Anybody else want to ask anything? Okay. So you now added this Muvdol Legamri Muhusa Chesha. But to understand this, let's read on, because the line itself is not really like how did the Choshech suddenly get into here, but we'll understand it, I'm sure, shortly. Val derech mashal, like for example, Misha etzem etziyuse nesave be'er. Just give me a moment here. I want to just see the end of this sentence here. Okay, I understand now. Let me explain it before we read it, because it's the Rebbe Rashab. It's very concentrated. This is a key point. Okay, we've been learning now about the Yud of Chochma. He did begin this topic to explain what he said before about Avir is Yud, but the key thing to remember here is that he's not talking about Avir now. He's talking about the of Chochma. So Chochma is a Yud, but he's going to explain that there's two different Yuds. There's the Yud of Chochma, which is connected to the Kav, Gilui, and then there's the Yud of Avir, which is connected to the Rishimu. So that's a key thing to keep in mind. He's going to get back to the Rishimu in the next page, in the second paragraph on the next page. Right now, we're talking about the Nekuda Yud as Gilui, not as Helam. So yes, there's the Yud, the Tzimtzum, the concealment of Chochma. It conceals, like a teacher concealing the idea to teach the student. But the focus here has been the Amitis Inyan Hayud in Chochma is Gilui. But what kind of Gilui? Gilui of Bittul, like he said. It's why it's a Yud, because it's in the state of, doesn't have an identity of its own. But it's still world of Gilui. In the world of Gilui, it's Muvdal, it's removed. What he's adding now, what he's going to explain now, is that Chochma, at the end of the day, does not have a relationship with darkness. The darkness of the Tzimtzum, the darkness of the Rishimu, or which will lead us to the third sweetening of the Gevurah, is coming from the world of Gevurah. He's going to explain that Chochma is like the second level of sweetening, where it's coming from Chesed and Oyer. That Oyer is illuminating the darkness. So even though Chochma is true, it's only a Nekuda, but it's still Oyer and Gilui. And because it doesn't relate at all to Helam. The fact that the Kesed is Helam is a different thing. Kesed is Helam. Chochma is Gilui. And like he said, that even the Ayin, even in Primis HaChochma, where he brings the Ayin of Kesed, it's still bringing it into the world of Giluyim. So the focus here is going to be that Chochma, the Yud of Chochma, is going to be like the second level of sweetening, where Oyer and Chesed is sweetening Gevurah from outside. Like Eitz HaChaim, that's completely beyond darkness. That's why he can transform darkness. But not from within, but from without. That's what he's leading up to right now. The Chochma, at the end of the day, is fundamentally Gilui. And that's why it's the Reshis Sakav. Reshis Sakav is Gilui, not Helam. Then we're going to move to Yud of Avir, which is in the Rishimu, and that's a different level of Yud. That's the Yud within the Helam. That's what he's leading up to here. So I think it's critical to explain that before we read on, or else it's going to be it'll be confusing. So let me read a few lines about this. So he says, so in K move on, the Primis HaChochma, especially the way it is in its root of Reshis Hakav, because as we just stated, it's not only is it Gilui, it's also it's Gilui. So it's in the state of what he said. I was confused because he used the word Muvdal, but he means Muvdal here now, even Muvdal from darkness. It's completely removed. Val derech mashal, misha etzem mitzius in nesava be'er. An entity that only knows of Oyer, Let's say somebody was born and they never saw darkness in their lives. He's going to say that afterwards, after the parentheses. Someone never saw darkness, so all they know is light. They're completely removed. They can't relate to the domain called darkness. That's what he's going to explain is the level of Chochma. Yesh leimer b'hanimshul. What is this level of someone, an entity created only in Oyer and Gilui? In the nimshul, in the moral, hainu b'chinas primis ha-Chochma. This is the level of the inner dimension of Chochma. Shezehu, next page, 1332. B'chinas eiris pnimim v'atzmin shalamayla ma'atzilus shebo bein ha-nemetzolim. This is the reflection, primis ha-Chochma, of the inner core energies of Oyer that are higher than Atzilus, being channeled through Chochma. Shabo, these higher levels are coming now and entering into the domain Bein HaNetzolim, like he said before, that Chochma, Primus HaChochma, is carrying the Ayin of Keser, Bein HaNetzolim, into the world, between the world of the emanations. Now, in Chochma, they did not become diminished and measured according to the measure of the level of the emanations. Like when we talk about Pnimius Abba, the Pnimius of Chochma is Pnimius Atik. It's not diminished. Which means, even when it's in Atzilus, the inner dimension of Chochma in Atzilus, Pnimius Atik. It retains the personality of Pnimius of Atik, which means something that is of a higher level of divine revelation. Even though it's not exactly like we learned earlier, Pnimius Abba is Pnimius Atik, it's not exactly, or else it wouldn't be called Pnimius Abba. But still, its fundamental nature is like Pnimius Atik, meaning that it carries that essential divine energy of who, like we said, that there's nothing but God. So even though it didn't get diminished, so what does Chochma accomplish? It accomplished that the Netzolim, the emanations of the 9 spheres afterward, of the 10 spheres, should come to a state of being transcendent and removed compared to where they are on their own. In other words, without Chochma, the other spheres would be more defined by their structure. Chochma introduces to them something from Atik, so that they should be somewhat. That's why Chochma is moved on. But it's still all about Oyer and Gilui, and it's not in a diminished state. And that's the meaning that the core essence of Chochma was shaped and created and formed in the inner core energy that was not diminished. In other words, Chochma is fundamentally a higher state of consciousness of Atik, the way it's now been, and it's been inserted into the world of emanations, of Giluim. So what do you see from this? That is fundamentally, that's what he says, it's me, she'etzem etzusin nesava be'er. Its whole personality of Chochma has nothing to do with darkness and concealment. Chochma does not relate to the concept of tzimtzum at all. That's what he's saying here, at least my understanding of it. So even though you could say, didn't he say earlier that the yud of Chochma is also tzimtzum in order for the recipient to receive it? So I would say that that comes afterwards. After the Chochma is what Chochma is, then there's another stage where Chochma has to diminish in order to give it to Bina, to the student. But Chochma itself, personality is created and shaped only in, it's like the prince growing up in a palace. All he knows is the light of the divine, not experienced any concealment. That's what he's saying here, pretty much. Okay, this is clearly, as I've said, volume 3 in Ayin Beis, the Rebbe Rashab wrote once. He never went over it a second time and edited it. I could see it clearly in the lines here, where he's basically very dense lines. Like right now, he just says, and he's relying that we have to now flesh out what that means. So my recollection, based on what he's saying here, means delve into what we learned earlier about the inner dimension of the kav, that's shahu etzem. So the primis kav is the etzem. So meaning is the etzem ha'oir, not etzem helam ha'atzmi, etzem ha'oir. So the primis kav, since Chochma is connected, primis Chochma for sure, to reshis kav, the beginning of the kav, which is a nakuda. That nakuda and the primis kav is rooted in the etzem. So it all strengthens the case that Chochma is essentially coming down, like it's carrying the package of undiluted or unconcealed light. Now he continues. I'll just read on because I'll just finish this thought here. So it says, now he continues before the parentheses. Remember, he said, me, someone, me, something or someone who is fundamentally created and shaped in the world of light. And the parentheses, he explained that the nimshal, that's the level of primis chochma. So now he says, and this individual or this entity never saw darkness in his lifetime. Someone who never saw darkness, complete light. Like we learned earlier, if you remember, when he spoke about Eitz HaChaim, that the Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life, doesn't have any connection to death altogether. It's not like in a world there's life and death, and that's life. It's completely beyond. Yamusu v'lei b'chachma he brought. That not in Chochma, the concept of Yamusu, death, doesn't exist in Chochma. B'pchinas ha'primis, in the level of primis. So the concept of choshech and death and all those negative energies don't exist. Gevurah doesn't exist there. He doesn't recognize at all the personality of darkness. Someone only sees light. Omnam, however, that alone, that is so beyond and muvdal, removed from darkness, now I'm thinking what he said earlier, that Chochma is muvdal from Hasaga. Is Hasaga a form of darkness, a form of concealment? Maybe. I'll think about that. Okay. So because of this fact, this very fact that it's so removed and never saw darkness, Mishum Za'atzme, that alone is the reason Lias muvdal legamri, Mishum Za'atzme, Lias muvdal legamri, because it's completely removed. Yesh b'koyach ha'er, the oir has the power. Hazeh, this oir, this form of light, this intense light, has the power to transform the darkness to light. As we learned earlier, Ayin Beis, in the second level of sweetening, that comes from the tree of life, like Torah. Remember, we learned Torah, because Torah is completely higher than the negative. Because the tree of life, Chaim, it's a Chaim, that Eitz that was, according to the opinion in the Zohar, that the branch that was thrown into the bitter waters was from the tree of life. Since it's completely removed from evil, from negative, and there's no possibility of any negative thing grasping onto it. And not only in the Etzem, but also as the Eir is transmitted. That's the level of the Teira, the light of Teira. And for sure, the Moyer of Teira. Canal, we go back, if you go back to the page where Machzir Lemutov, that was on page, where was that? Here we go. Page 1322. So he explained, and for sure the Moyer, not just the oyer, but even the oyer, but also for sure the moyer. Al kain biyacholte, because it's so removed from the negative. That's why it has the capacity to transform the negative to the positive, the evil, the bad waters to the sweet ones, the bad to the good. The kol zeh and all this ubchinas ha'oyer. This is all the level of oyer, k'moshe ba begilui. The acharat tzimtzum, the way it becomes manifest in a revealed way after the tzimtzum. Remember, this is the nakuda of Chochma rooted in the kav, the nakuda of the kav. So this is all the Gilui after the Tzimtzum. This is not the Yud in the Avir of Rishimu, which is going to be the next paragraph. So what he explained now in this parenthesis, in this last paragraph, is that the Yud in general is Chochma. It's a revelation, and it's the second, like the second level of sweetening, where Oyer becomes b'mekei macheshach. That Oyer has the power to transform, not just to neutralize, or to minimize, or to what we learned before, neutralize and to weaken, but to actually transform, because it's so beyond it all. But that's still coming from Oyer, not from the power of Cheshach itself, from the Gevurah itself. That's what he says here in this paragraph. So I'll stop here, end of the paragraph on page 1332. And I know we went a little longer than usual, but I started also late, so that's fine. Anybody wants to ask anything?
Rabbi Jacobson, what you just described, can it be visualized? I mean, to me, that's the way I visualize it. Is the letter Aleph, that it's a Yud above and it's a Vav like a Hamshacha and the Yud below. And could
I don't know. I mean, anything's possible. I mean, it's speculation at this point, unless you have a source. Everything is possible. I don't know.
So I have a different question, and maybe he's going to talk about it in the next paragraph. But he spent a lot of time talking about how the Yud is the beginning of Chochma, which is completely separate from darkness. And he's Dafka apparently trying to come to distinguish from the Yud and the Avir. I get it. But at the same time, he talked about the Rishimu consists of two parts, and it includes the Osios and also it includes the Orein Sof. So I'm having a hard time understanding how, on the one hand, the Yud and the Avir supposedly is not Gilui. It's has no relationship with darkness. On the other hand, when he describes the Rishimu, he says that it consists of two parts: Beis and Yanim, Etzem Nekudas Rishimu, Hanikra Osios Harishimu, and Bechinas Ha'orein Sof. So I'm having a hard time. He says, on the one hand, light is Yud has nothing to do with
You're having a hard
dark.
time for a simple reason, because we didn't learn it yet. I think after the next 2-3 pages, this will be clear. That's what he's going to explain next. He hasn't gotten to that yet. So,
okay.
I mean, you can read on and you'll probably find an answer to what you're asking, but that's the next 2-3 pages. It's going to be exactly what you're just asking about.
Okay.
What are the two things in the Rishimu? He's going to discuss that. I think pretty much at length, even. I'm looking now.
Okay.
He's going to do exactly, that's the next paragraph. Right now, he explained, like I've said, the Rebbe Rosh is going in his, step by step. He explained the Yud of Chochma and the Yud of the Kav, the Gilui, like the second level of sweetening. And then comes Amnam. He's going to now discuss the Yud within the Avir and see how that works.
Okay.
So I think your questions will be answered in the next few classes.
Okay. Thank you.
We learned about the Yud Shem Avaya, not the Yud Sheba Avir. That he called.
I don't know. We don't know about the Yud Sheba Avir yet. He didn't explain it yet. So we'll see. It's all, maybe it's connected, maybe it's not connected. Maybe, is it two different Yuds? Is it the same Yud in different states? Honestly, I don't know myself. I think the next paragraph, why don't you just say Amnam in Yud HaKol Ba'avir? He's clearly going to contrast the two. I would wait till we finish the next, let's see here, probably the next 2 pages. But this is the essential conversation. This is the discussion now about, this is exactly what he's talking about. Like I said, you could peek ahead and see what he says, but I will learn it. We're going to learn it. The next, I see the next page, he really addresses it straightforward.
I think that he explained something last time was not clear. He said that Pnimius Abo is Pnimius Atik, Einoi Komoyu Mamesh, Rakshana Etzolem Yevoil B'chinas Pera moved on Mibilis and Etzolem. Last time we had a question that the Ayin Beis that the Efes is more bittul than Ayin. So I think this is the explanation here.
And what's the explanation?
That Pnimius Abo is Pnimius Atik, Einoi Kemoyu Mamesh. But what it is, Shaneetzolim Yovoyu Libchinas Oil Hamuvdor Be'erech Mimidas Haneetzol.
I know what it says here, but what's the explanation of the between Ayin and Efes?
That in Atik, it's not even shayches that Yovoyu to.
Exactly, that's what I said. That's exactly what he says. Correct. Chochma comes into the world of Netzolim. It's bringing, like I said, just like the Rishimu, in a way, carries that the forces before the Tzimtzum. Chochma carries Atik into Atzilus. Yeah. Remember, everything is about interfaces. Remember that everything is about an interface. You constantly want to have a bridge between the divine that's beyond and integrating it into existence. Every level in Shtalshlus is doing that. Chochma plays a tremendous role because Chochma is right there at the crossroad between Keser and the spheres and the 10 revealed spheres. Well, similar to what the Reish Sakav is like the crossroad between the Lifnei Tzimtzum and the Shtalshlus. That's why it's Ke'ein Atik. Remember, the Reish Sakav is like Atik, and Chochma is what's carrying Atik into the Netzolim, into the emanations. So it's basically, in simple English, existence is defined by its identity. Yes, of its identity, and the ayin or ma of koyach ma of chochma is bringing in the sense, like I said, of a higher reality of hu levadei ve'ein zolase, and God alone and nothing else. Atik is that entity. That's what he said. That is that entity. It's not in any revealed way. It's complete. That's the entity. Chochma is carrying that consciousness into the consciousness of Chochma, then into the world of Netzolim. So that would be the difference in that sense.
Yeah, he's saying it with very specific. The Chochma carries the Netzolim should come to oil hamuvdo mimidas and Netzolim. But this is already a connection.
Yeah. And this is still Netzolim. We're not even talking about Nivroim Bia Yitzir Asiyah. Yeah.
I listened to the Reshima that Rabbi Yitzchak put on. This is fascinating, is not enough to say. But you said at the K level.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, and it helps it's really based on what we learned here, and it also helps understand this. Yeah. Say this. I will say this before I stop the recording. Tonight's class is going to be the first time I'm applying the ideas of Ayin Beis into a real psychological model. So I just recorded the class before this class. So I strongly encourage checking it out. It's literally these ideas, but not in this language. It's in psychological language. The title of the class is Trauma the New Scapegoat. It's all about trauma and how you transform it. And as you'll see, it's my first real stab.
Amazing.
This is very exciting.
Yeah.
This is very exciting.
Did you put it on the WhatsApp?
It's not yet. It has to still be produced. I just did the raw recording. It'll be tonight at 8. It plays at 8:30, so you'll be able to see it at 8:30. They have to still prepare it. There's a few edits they put in. They have to add a beginning and whatever. It's technical stuff. It's for tonight's class 8:30. I just recorded it earlier so they can produce it.
Leonard, I'll post it to the Ayin Beis thread.
Yeah, you'll have it by tonight. You'll have it up there tonight. And I definitely recommend. I'd like to hear your thoughts because you'll know right away where it's from. But people listening, I didn't spell out the actual levels. I didn't want to make it that dense. But you'll immediately see.
Very exciting.
So, yeah. That's hopefully. I hope I did justice to it because it was not so easy to do, to be honest.
But that's the whole purpose. of the
Yeah,
head-
no, yeah. I know. I try to turn it into a whole process system here. 1 second. Yeah.
Very exciting.
Yeah. Okay, so let's let me finish the